So there are two ways we repeatedly make trouble for ourselves. First, emotional reaction to circumstances. I think we covered that fairly well. So let's go to the second one. Manipulating change versus initiating a creative cycle for change. So as I said, there are things in our lives that are not so heavenly. Things that clearly need changing. But you know, usually people don't even think about initiating a creative cycle to bring change. Usually it's like this. I want it to change, and I want it to change right now. Of course, I've never done that. So, of course, with that attitude, we do something in frustration, and that actually makes things worse. Action based in frustration, or more subtle reactions of calculating how to manipulate something. These actions actually interfere with what is already in motion from heaven that is bringing change. So it's not that change is not needed, but reactive actions block us from seeing how what we could do would assist heaven in bringing the change. So the usual approach is something like this. React to what needs changing. Complain about it. Tear it apart. And then demand change. Well, that sounds more like a destructive cycle than a creative cycle, doesn't it? And actually, most times, we don't have to engineer the whole chain. What's needed from us is usually just a small part to initiate change. So instead of just a little finger, a light touch, we get out our hammer. Bigger hammer than that. So when we see things need changing, it likely indicates we're in a water cycle. What is our right action in the water cycle? In the Art of Living seminar, our first level seminar, we learn it's listen for direction and design. But in the fourth level LTW, we look more deeply. And we see it's important that we respond to the light and initiate a creative cycle. So instead of being dragged down into the problem in a downward spiral, we need to deliberately do something to increase the light, to turn our attention to the light and away from the problems. I'm sure you have experienced that when we have problems, they can easily absorb all of our attention. But in that state, we don't have much light. When we respond to the light, we begin to see what we could do about the problems. When we respond to the light, how we see and what we see changes. We see opportunities, new starting points, and larger perspective. So I think actually everyone that's listening to me right now has discovered how much has changed in their lives when they respond to the light, when you respond to the light. People here are nodding. 맞아요. So sometimes it takes real muscle, spiritual muscle, to turn your attention to the light, especially when the problems seem really heavy and really complex and really urgent. One process we learned in LTW for handling such heavy patterns, we call attunement prayer. It actually does exactly this. It turns our attention to the light and helps us initiate a creative cycle. So initiating a creative cycle does not mean quick action is never necessary, but even quick action should be based in true creative principles and attitudes that are true to who we are. But most of the time, it isn't quick action. Have you noticed how God's creations or nature's creations take time? Especially in this Pali culture and in the age of the internet and the cell phone when everything is 5 seconds, we forget. Things take time. What if instead of a baby taking 9 months to develop in the womb, it was 9 minutes? I think most mothers would not like that. So even in the spring, the flowers and the leaves don't just pop out.
네.
They gently grow and unfold in several weeks. So it takes patience to initiate a creative cycle. 인내, patience. The first step to become the temple of light.
네.
So I think you now see more clearly that there are two ways that we repeatedly make trouble for ourselves. So I want to revisit this as we close, particularly look at what can we do instead. So instead of emotional reaction to circumstance, we realize we do have a choice of what we give our heart to.
네.
So I want to ask you to answer,
네.
what should we give our heart to? What is a creative choice? 대답해 주세요. Thankfulness. Good.
천사의 사랑과 기쁨 그리고 하늘의 빛.
Light of the heaven and love of angels and joy of angels.
Beauty. Okay. And
내면의 고요함.
Inner stillness.
inner stillness. That's nice too. Okay.
네, 시인의 진정한 창조인 자연을 본다.
See the nature which is God's true creation.
아름다워요. Beautiful. Yes. I was waiting for the word truth. Is that truth? So, yeah, all of what you said is good, and it helps turn our hearts in a direction of heaven, the light, truth. So I want to read a short verse from the Gita that describes this choice. And before I do, I want to say, in a way, at the mental level, this is a very simple thing. But have you noticed how easy it is to forget it? Because the habit and the prevailing practice in humanity is definitely not to respond to the light. So that's why I'm emphasizing it, because it has to go in so deep that even when it's very dark for us, suddenly we remember, oh, what was that? Oh, respond to the light. Because there are things that happen that actually trick us, and we think that we are doing something creative, but actually it's manipulation. Okay, so this is from the Gita. Whoso, shaking off the yoke of the outer, lives Lord, not servant of his life.
네.
Set free from pride, from fear, from sin of self. That one touches tranquility. That is the state divine. So, in my words, when we choose to shake off control by outer circumstances, we live as Lord of our life, not victim. And we start to experience tranquility. And we know the divine state. We know who we really are. Okay, now let's look at what we can do instead of the second way that we make trouble for ourselves. Instead of manipulating change, we can initiate a creative cycle for change. And we begin a creative cycle by responding to the light. And then we work with creative principles each step of the way under heaven's guidance. When we give our full heart to this, you know what happens? Heaven begins to take form through us. Things that were not so heavenly in our lives become just a little bit more heavenly. And step by step, we experience more of heavenly home in our lives. And we bring heavenly home once again to this beautiful earth. And the key is what we give our heart to. In this we have a choice. What we give our heart to can generate and sustain pneumoplasm.
네.
And pneumoplasm makes all the difference in our life. So that's it from me. So let's choose to give our hearts to the light.